So, hi everyone. Welcome to our conversation and artist talk with Eric Kunsman as part of our exhibition, Trust But Verify. We will have any help you need or any instructions. Please put that in the chat if you're on Zoom. If you're on Facebook, you can leave a comment and we'll do our best to help you with any challenges you're having with the software. We'll be taking comments and questions, of course. We received a number of terrific questions from our social followers and email. A couple of those I've integrated into my comments and my questions for Eric. And we just love that kind of community dialogue. But we're certainly open for other questions and other comments today. Please put those in the chat. We won't get them onto the conversation real time, but we'll be able to integrate them in toward the end. And I've got a couple quick announcements. First, I really want to acknowledge and recognize what is happening in Rochester, the protests, the marches, the incredible, tireless efforts of the protest organizers. For the last several weeks, daily protesters have been organizing, and as many in the community are hurting and mourning and fed up, and they're coming together to call for justice for Daniel Prude, and are creating hopefully systemic change in our city and beyond. And it's important, I think, that we recognize that right now before we begin this event. And those of you who maybe want to learn more, don't know much about it, tuning in from elsewhere, or you're here in Rochester and you want to get involved or you want to help, I think the first stop for you would be to start following and paying attention to and listening to Free the People Rock. And also, we're trying out a new plugin. Seems to be working okay, but if you're having any trouble with the captions, just send us a message either on Facebook or on Zoom, and we'll work out the captions for you. And please send us your feedback on how the captions work. Really important to us that we have a talk like this recorded and captioned. So give us your feedback on that system, please. In addition to Trust But Verify, we have a couple other programs going right now. A couple are typical for us. We have a wonderful lab space exhibition, a series of terrific drawings by Andrew Zimbelman, and that will run concurrently with Trust But Verify. And we also have a terrific public art project called Underpin and Overcoat. And that's presented in partnership with the Susan B. Anthony Museum. And these enlarged pinback buttons are installed on our building here on East Avenue and 4 other locations across the city, including the Susan B. Anthony House and Museum. So if you haven't seen that public art project, please check it out. And lastly, but perhaps most germane to what's happening in our city today, one of our pivots over the last several months, really, since June, has been to step into a small film production role and help supporting filmmakers in Rochester, especially a group of young filmmakers who are people of color, who are working to document how our community is feeling about public safety, about racial injustice, about uncertainty due to COVID and our current political climate. So we've been working with Rashad Parker, Rajesh Barnabas, Darian Lehman, and a few others, really. And Rashad Parker is really the lead organizer of this, producing a series of short documentaries called Rock City Speaks. And the first edition was in our front window for 2 months, and then was moved online about a week ago. You can see that on our website. And they're currently producing upcoming episodes, chapters of Rock City Speaks. So stay tuned for that. Really important way of documenting what our city is going through and what our community is feeling. And again, just two more institutional announcements. We're back and open to the public now. We're doing our best. We're trying this out. We're open with significant attendance limitations. We're way under the state mandated limits. And we're open on our normal gallery hours, 12 to 5, Wednesday through Saturday, and Friday, 12 to 9 p.m. So please, come and visit us. It's been wonderful after many months of being closed and having no visitors in the space. Since September 4th, we've been back open. It's just been wonderful to have people coming in and talking about art, especially this exhibition, which is quite timely and related to our national political and media environment. And this exhibition, Trust But Verify, as you can see on your screen now, is supported by Aaron Newman and Blackbird AI, Richard Glazer, Security 101, Rome Celli. It's presented in partnership with Gallery Curator in Mexico. And all of our programs here are sponsored in part by the New York State Council on the Arts. So thank you to all those supporters who helped to make this happen. Trust But Verify brings together three major projects that address our society's current grappling, I would say, with the whole notion of truth and veracity. And I think the implications of this we're seeing and feeling every single day when we hear the debates between the White House and the CDC over whether a mask will help protect people from COVID-19 or it won't. Seemingly simple scientific bits of information are now highly contested and are seemingly presented from two opposing sides. So our society certainly is grappling with this and has been for some time. And absolutely one key way that I think we've all seen this has been through the health crisis and really the complexity of getting clear and the challenges of getting clear information out to the public regarding something so critical as health in the viral epidemic. So we're going to get into that a little bit today. And the three projects in the exhibition sort of start from a point of past, present, and future. And today we'll be talking with Eric about really the the present component of the exhibition, where I think he picks up on something that many of us saw maybe most graphically illustrated with then candidate Donald Trump's incessant use of the term fake news as during the 2016 elections. And that really led to Eric's project. And I'm looking forward to that dialogue and conversation with Eric and learning more about his impetus for the project. This coming Saturday, we'll have another artist talk at 12 p.m. with Bill Posters and Daniel Howe. And they really represent the future aspect of this exhibition. And they've produced a series of deep fake videos, which really are frightening to think about the long-term implications of video and how easily it can be manipulated today. But again, we're already seeing that technology changing really rapidly. And then on October 10th, we'll have another artist talk in the same format with Octavio Abundez, and he will speak about his monumental painting called A Fake History of Humanity, where he has really taken Kellyanne Conway's comments about alternative facts and built his own alternative variation and taken many, many liberties with the historical record in an interesting, creative, and frightening way. So I'm really looking forward to those two events. I hope you all will join us. And again, today we will be talking with Eric, and today's program is really, in association with with this exhibition. So I want to begin by welcoming you, Eric. Thank you for sharing your artwork with us in this exhibition. And I'd like to ask you to begin by, telling us a little bit about your background, how you got into photography, and that will lead us to talk about some of the other major projects you've taken on in Rochester over the past few years.
All right. So I'm originally from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and a lot of my work is actually rooted from my upbringing because I was watching literally the Bethlehem Steel, which built part of the United States, literally close when I was in high school. I'd always been interested in fine art. It wasn't until high school I found out, and I loved history. But that's when I took my first photo class, and like many other photographers, it clicked everything together for me. Quite literally, history, the arts. It just made it much, much easier for me. And that's where I'm still in Rochester, New York. I studied at RIT for two of my undergrad degrees. My wife and I joke, we have a competition going on to see who got the most degrees. But we decided to stay or come back after I was in New Jersey for 3 years and relocate back to Rochester. My wife works for the city school district. She loves it. And with that, I started Booksmart Studio. And Booksmart Studio has been a hindrance to making new work. And then since I've recently relocated, it's allowed me to create a lot more work. I also teach at the Rochester Institute of Technology. My current job is I work at NTID. So I work with a lot of the deaf and hard of hearing students that are in the photo school. So I support them through tutoring as well. I also teach for the photography department, graduate and undergraduate courses. So I get to wear a few different hats. And that's where body work that's actually up right now, which we'll talk about, I guess, in a little bit, was actually from my teaching at RIT. Actually, I might as well talk about now since it's there. The second year I was teaching was, and the second day of my freshman class was 9/11. And what happened was the first student walked in and said, can I keep my cell phone on? I know you have a cell phone policy, but my aunt works in the South Tower. I said, look, there are no rules today. And instead of talking about shutter speeds and f-stop, what we wound up doing was just talking about how photography and video would shape the history of that day. And at the end of the day, we wound up coming up with a self-assignment for the class, which was to call everybody we knew and collect every newspaper we could. We wound up with papers from Macedonia and then all throughout the United States. In total, I believe we had 84 different newspapers. And what you're seeing up on the screen right now is actually on the 15th anniversary, I went back and resurveyed those students because I didn't know. It was my second year teaching. I didn't know if I did anything good for the students or not. So I was really interested to follow up. And so sent out a survey to those students. All but 2 replied. I don't know if they ever got the email, but some remembered the smell of the classroom. Some remembered absolutely nothing. And so for the 15th anniversary at Gallery R, which is part of RIT, we actually had this installation where we had the newspapers the class had collected, as well as the quotes from the students answering those questions anonymously. And so this is where typically my photography is more social documentary, but this is more of where it's truly documentary, which I would say later came into this body of work, which is the fake news. So that's a quick background for me.
Great. Thanks, Eric. And then, so, while, again, just for housekeeping as well, for these first few images, we'll sync them up with Eric's comments about his past work. But we'll also then continue to cycle through a whole range of other images. So, for those of you who are looking to align the image with Eric's comments, that will work for the first few images here. So, Eric, can you tell us about the project that's pictured now?
Yeah, from 2005 up to 2017, my studio was located near the Eastman Museum in the Memorial Art Gallery here in Rochester, New York. And for 10 years, had a pretty large facility, and my company's Booksmart Studio. In 2017, I relocated to a different area of Rochester, which is near our soccer stadium and baseball stadium. And I was getting a lot of knee-jerk reactions from colleagues and friends, which was, it's scary there, or it's a war zone. And so I started really looking at why they were having that knee-jerk reaction. And because I started to get from the families, 3 9-year-olds, when I back backed up the first Penske truck, came over and started helping me literally move stuff into the studio. Halfway through, they're like, "Are we gonna get paid?" I'm like, "I don't have any cash. I'm moving." And like, "Well, what do you have?" And went through the cupboards, and there was coffee mugs. And they were ecstatic for those mugs. You'd have thought I paid them $100 each, and they continued to help me empty the entire truck. So that, what I was observing was completely disconnected from what everybody else that was labeling this area was seeing. So I started trying to figure out why. And I noticed really three things. Corner stores, neighborhood bars, and a lot of payphones. Within 6 square blocks, we had about 40 payphones in Rochester. So I started photographing them, just trying to observe what was actually happening. And for me, I didn't know if it was going to be anything. And then SEPA Gallery came out. They did a studio visit for a different body of work, and they said they didn't want to show that anymore, but they wanted the payphones. This is 3 months into the project. So what I did was started photographing them a little bit more religiously, and then eventually Frontier Communications sponsored the work by giving me the list of all 1,455 payphones. So there's a lot more to this project. I'm trying to get to every location. I'm mapping them. I'm using census information to give people data that, you know, the crime doesn't necessarily relate to the payphone locations, but poverty does. As well as I've been buying payphones, which are required to stay at my studio because they'll be installed in the gallery also. And I'm interviewing the individuals that are still relying on these payphones. And that's called fellowshipic calculus, technology as a social marker of race, class, and economics in Rochester, New York. And then what you're seeing on the screen right now is a supporting body of work, which is called Lifelines throughout the United States. Because Rochester is not the only community where people still rely on payphones, literally as a lifeline to communicate with their doctors, their family. And sometimes it could even be where there's no cell reception. Like here, this is Point Reyes National Seashore. There's no cell phone reception. This is still a working payphone. So there's that mode of communication. So those are 2 bodies of work that I'm currently working on at this time.
Thanks. So, you know, you've kind of, I think, teed up your various different interests in image making, recording, and media critique, and you know, kind of cultural documents. In 2016, as I think quickly just mentioned before, you know, we saw then candidate Trump using the term fake news. And what did you think when you first heard that phrase, just to start to put a toe into this conversation?
I was personally really hoping it was only being used during the campaign season. I thought, honestly, that it would go away. And I was really hoping he was going to surround himself with a good cabinet, good people that would actually help him and not just be yes people. That's what I was hopeful that would happen with the whole rhetoric of the fake news. And I was truly just hoping he was just using it for the campaign and it would just disappear magically somehow. And I was obviously very wrong. And that's why this particular project, I didn't really start that much. And right after, obviously you see the day of the election or day after, I took the screenshots. But then from that point forward, I didn't do anything really till inauguration. And I slowly did it. And I was only really capturing CNN at first. And it's because that's who he was attacking the most. And then I quickly realized, wait, I need more than CNN. I need CNN, ABC, Fox News, New York Times, Washington Post, just for a true comparison of all the different entities. So that was really, I mean, again, that's just how it started. And we'll get more into that, I'm sure.
Yeah, just let me make one quick announcement. For those of you who are just joining in, you can change your view options at the top and you can select fit to window. Some people, when they land on the screen, that's how it looks. And that will make the artwork images larger and will make Eric, myself, and Alyssa's screen a bit smaller. So sorry for that, a brief announcement there. So Eric, so you were describing kind of setting the stage for this, right? So Trump kind of labeling CNN most aggressively as fake news, right? and you started to capture these screenshots, and your initial intention was to record this because you felt that you could see one headline on one outlet's website and a different headline on another. And where did you see that leading from the beginning?
Well, I should really go back to why I started this project. And it really goes all the way back to my son was 6 years old at the time during the 2016 election. He was in first grade. We didn't talk politics with my kids, or my son at the time. And one day he came home and said, "Oh, we're going to have a mock election for the presidential election." We said, "Oh, really?" And we found out that here the kids, instead of playing on the playground at their school in the suburbs of Rochester, I live in Penfield, what was happening is the kids were debating Trump versus Hillary. They weren't playing kickball. They weren't playing soccer. They were amusing themselves by discussing the upcoming presidential election. So one day we finally asked my son, "Well, who are you going to vote for?" And he said, "Trump." And we said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, Hillary's going to make China great again." We said, "Wait a minute. That sounds way too familiar. Where did you hear that?" And he was on TV. And sure enough, we're watching the Philadelphia Eagles, because that's my team. That's where I'm, near that area. But we're watching the football game that weekend. And sure enough, up comes a commercial, which was propaganda. It's black and white. I still remember it. It was a very dark commercial. The way they lit, the way they altered the videography. And I remember thinking to myself, like, that's what my son is getting, because here we aren't talking to him about politics. So we basically had to start talking to a 6-year-old about politics and just really letting him know the different sides. We didn't want to shape him too much, but at the same time, we wanted him to understand everything that was going on. So because of that, after the election, I wanted to kind of record history, initially, the big moments for him. And my daughter, who's now, ironically, 5.5, as we go into this next campaign season and attending the same school in Penfield. But for me, that's why it was also just CNN, because that's what was being attacked. And then the idea of it snowballing to CNN, ABC, Fox, New York Times, Washington Post, is I wanted to have that same idea where what we did is we presented him all the different news facts. And this was never intended to be an artist project. It was never intended to be a book project. It was initially just supposed to be for my kids. And then as it grew and the idea of fake news never died, it only got worse. That's when it became an idea of, okay, I need to record all these different channels. And I'd probably say in about, probably be spring to summer of 2017, then I realized, no, you know what? This is actually becoming a project that is going to be a book, going to be an archive that I hope future generations can actually look back on the events rather than which news channel was right.
So tell us about your thinking there. Like, as you started capturing these screenshots, and now your thinking changes to preserving this moment for posterity. What does your process look like? What did you go through, and what did you actually produce here? For those who haven't been in to see the exhibition, maybe you can describe what you've done over the last almost 4 years here, and what people see when they come into the gallery.
Absolutely. So one thing is I record, at first it started out, it'd be once a day. Then it became multiple times throughout the day. And now since COVID has hit and the next campaign season, I'm almost capturing them hourly. And what you're seeing is I am not editing them at all. And what I mean by that is they literally go in order or sequence that I capture them. So at the top, you can see the hour which it was captured. You can also see my battery life. And it's kind of interesting because some people freak out. It's like, oh my God, your phone's gonna die. It's like, it's okay, that was in the past. But the idea with that is what you're really seeing is the headlines. And pre-COVID, it was specifically only the headline that you would see on the phone when you first launched CNN, ABC, Fox, New York Times, and Washington Post. Huffington Post was added, as well as some others when there was additional commentary, and Huffington Post has become a regular also now. But really that's how it started, was just the initial true headline. Once COVID and the elections hit, those headlines go 6 iPhones deep. And the reason is there's so much information being thrown out there. And also, by the time you want to compare what CNN's covering or Fox, you need to be able to go a few deep because of the order that they're actually providing the information. So I'm trying to make sure that the same information from the different channels is provided. And that's why volumes 3, 4, and 5 are over 1,000 pages. And we'll talk about that page count, I'm sure, in a little while. But this kind of really gives you an idea. And I tried to stick to the sequence of CNN, ABC, Fox News, New York Times, and Washington Post. And then I would add supplemental if one of those channels changed their headline. And that's really what you're seeing. And the reason is I want you to be able to compare daily. And they are organized by day. So if there's an odd number for, let's say, August 2nd, 2017, there might be one payphone on the back page. And then August 3rd, we'll start on a new clean page.
And so why did you choose to present these through the frame of a phone?
The reason is, for me, so people realize that I'm not editing these and I'm not going and changing anything on the phones. And this is how the news was presented. I'm not capturing newspapers. I'm not capturing it through going online with my computer. It is simply done right on my iPhone. And that's why you can see the generation of, I forget what I had before this iPhone, but you can actually see that generational change also. And for me, that's why it was important to put it back on the iPhone.
Is there a message that you're sending about the highly available nature of news today and the ephemeral aspect of a news headline today? Perhaps, not that long ago, just back to your 9/11 project, the key image on the cover of the newspaper at least hung around for a full day. At least it occupied your record of that event and that occurrence for one full day. And now, as we all know, and perhaps we're arguably all, to some degree addicted to news, that feed is constantly changing, and not unlike social media, some people are hooked on the phone and the scroll down and the update of the homepage and what comes next. Did that factor into did the kind of obsessive, compulsive, hooked on media aspect factor in for you?
Absolutely. And that was the biggest thing that I was seeing originally, was back in 2017, 2018. Those pages would pretty much be static for most of the day. You might see a change in the morning, possibly in the afternoon, and sometimes in the evening. And that's what I was capturing. And as you said, it was almost as if it was still a newspaper, where here's your news for the day. But right before, actually, I'd probably say it was right during the impeachment, when the media was changing hourly and changing almost as if it mimicked social media. The only time that I included tweets, which you just saw in that last photo, is volume 4, which was during the impeachment trial. I have not done anything during COVID or this election season. And the reason was because I figured it was a true account for what Trump's take was on the impeachment, because it was directly affecting him. Other than that, you can see the volume in the last, like I said, since the impeachment on, the changing of the news. It acts more like social media in some ways, where it is changing hourly. And you can see that in the difference in the thickness of the books, because originally this project was only supposed to be 3 books: red, white, and blue. Red was going to be from election to 1 year after inauguration. White was going to be 1 year after inauguration up to the Mueller report release, 10 days after that. And volume 3, which was the blue, was going to be 10 days after Mueller report up to the next election. And then we know what happened. The impeachment happened, COVID happened. Now this crazy campaign season is going on. And that's where you can see just daily and hourly how things are changing. Even whether it's the imagery or just the headlines and the captions, the media is putting things out so quickly that they're not always truly fact checking, or they might have to pull back at times also. So some of that is recorded in here as well. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and it brings up a couple other little details I want to ask about, and some of these you've touched on, but maybe you can give in greater detail what people actually experience if they come in and they hit volume 1. Again, you're working on 8 volumes of these, conceivably, right? And you're 5 volumes in. And what do people actually experience when they walk up to one of these tomes?
So what you're truly seeing is a historical archive of the Donald J. Trump presidency. And the reason why I say that is it is linear from election and then what's in the exhibition all the way up till June 30th. So at first there might be a few blips with days or months missing, as I've discussed already, election day, inauguration. And then from there, it was more intermittent because I was truly hopeful he was going to surround himself with people. And that's where, as you're experiencing it, you're basically reliving the events and the news of the day. And because you're able to see CNN, ABC, Fox News, New York Times, the Washington Post, you get to make your own judgments as to what you're seeing. I think one of the most important dates, it was up a few slides ago, it'll probably come back around, was the day that Notre Dame Cathedral was burning. For me, it was a pretty important day. I mean, because we thought everybody should be covering Notre Dame. It's an iconic architectural institution. Well, with that, CNN, ABC are covering. Fox News is covering something bad about Bernie Sanders. New York Times and Washington Post are covering Notre Dame. So right there, some of the different juxtapositions that you'll see on what news is important to the different outlets at that time. And that's where you're really looking at the different events. Like, oh yeah, I remember this day. Notre Dame Cathedral is burning. But wait a minute, why was Fox talking about this? And you really get to relive back many things. And that's where what I'm really trying to do is get this out a lot more before this campaign, because there's so much information on social media. There's so many things that we're being basically pushed to forget. So I want to get this back in front of people so you can make your own opinions and relive the history that we've all forgotten. And that's what this really is about, is reliving history through these multiple news channels.
So what are you saying about our attention span by only capturing the headline, the snapshot?
Basically, that's all we're looking for. I mean, if you think about even social media, what are we looking at? We're looking at that caption. Very rarely do you read down the entire story. We're all guilty of this. Anybody on Instagram, half the time we don't even read what the caption is underneath the photo. We're looking for pretty photographs, but somebody might be putting some commentary there. I think one of the most important people right now in Rochester, New York, is Joshua Rashad McFadden, covering everything throughout the United States. He's not always just putting photographs up there, but how many people are reading those captions? And that's where all we're exposed to now is the big, bold, whatever's flashing in front of us. And I tease my students at RIT all the time. If you can keep somebody's attention for more than 2 seconds, you've succeeded. Because we either all have ADD or ADHD or triple ADHD. And that's really why it started with just the headlines, because nobody wants to read the stories. And another reason for the headlines for me personally is copyright. This is an archive. I don't want to be taking somebody's full story and putting it back on the page. So that's why I also only put the first page of a website in the books.
Is there anything uniquely ironic or tongue-in-cheek in recording the presidency and documenting the presidency of Donald Trump, who seems to be uniquely, in our presidential history, uniquely attentive to media attention, by recording his presidency through the news headlines?
Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's the entire thing. Is, if I don't know what he would, I don't think he would like this archive, because even though he is craving the attention, he hates how the coverage is having him perceived at times. And that's where it's bringing the back in front of people. And that's not the point of why I'm trying to do it. But one of the worst things that's happened, you were asking about irony. As I'm recording this, I'll try to hold this up. I hope everybody can see this. But on our iPhones, we have family and friends on our iPhone. And my album for my family and friend, I'll go through it pretty quick. All right, you can see that. So Donald Trump is now my #1 person in my family. And I can flip through, and you're going to see everybody that's been involved in politics over the last 4 years is now part of my family, according to my iPhone. And the reason why I say that this is kind of ironic, and it just keeps going, is I haven't been able to escape the news. So I've watched too much of what's going on at times where I'm not escaping it, and I'm comparing myself from one day to the next, how CNN, any of the channels, talked about the story one day and then the follow-up. And that's really what allows these books to occur. And for me, the best part is when our president is saying, I never said that. And it's like, wait a minute, right here it is on November 15th, 2018. Here it is. And it's not just CNN, it's ABC, Fox, New York Times, and Washington Post. It's all there and it's recorded history. And that's where it doesn't matter where you are, whether you're a supporter of Trump or not. And I truly state this, but sometimes you have to look at what he's saying, and that's why this is an archive.
So you started to touch a little bit on the impact of this project on you. Can you say more, anything more about that?
Yeah, I'm just burned out of seeing all this, that I can't escape any of it. And I think one of the worst things was, when everything started happening with George Floyd, seeing, all these different things popping up. And then here it was the entire time in our backyard, quite literally almost in the backyard near the studio with Daniel Pruitt, all these things. So that's where, kind of go off tangent here, but just having that occur, it really does, it's taken a toll at times where I wanted a big event where we were going to put this back in front people. I did this at A. Smith Gallery in Johnson City, Texas. Cultivate 712 in Waco, Texas. They were the beta tests because I wanted people to gather and basically take the pages and rebroadcast them. I still want to do that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but there's been burnout where I almost need help now getting some of the events going because the bandwidth of making these. I had a student or a former student, Alex, who really helped me who helped me to design these, get them put in place, because there's so much work to creating these 1,000 pages, because in total right now at Rocco is 4,000 pages. Typically each page has 6 screenshots. So you're looking at 24,000 screenshots of news, and whatever you want to think is fake is up to you. But for me personally, I am done. No matter what happens with this election, I can't do it any longer. I'm done. So either if Trump wins, it will end on that day that it's announced. If Biden wins, it will go up until inauguration to cover the full Trump presidency. And that's just my personal take on what I need to do, kind of for mental health. I joke with people at times that I feel like it's a joke, but it's not a joke, that I need to go in rehab for 2 weeks where I don't have my phone on me. And my family has suffered because first thing I do when I wake up, screenshots. When there's a down moment after dinner or anything, screenshots. Before bed, screenshots. Oftentimes, like, what are you doing? It's like, Dad's doing screenshots again. So that's one of the biggest reasons. But I think, honestly, if you can't get a hold of me for 2 weeks after the election, it's probably because I put my phone in a safe for 2 weeks. So I can't do this. And that's just being honest, how it truly has affected me in some ways, because this is not my photography work. I've been done with this since COVID hit, and just watching the lack of information that's truly being given to the United States, no matter who you follow. And the reason why I say that is just seeing that going on, it's completely disheartening. And Bleu and I had a conversation the other day about this. People are so numb and suffering. I mean, we all have some apathy right now because of COVID, the election, everything going on, that nobody's doing anything. People are forgetting about what values are important to them and making sure they're doing something for this election. And seeing that, that's also coming through in the fake news lately. And that's the most disheartening part right now, that people really aren't doing what we need to do. Either if you, well, we know the supporters are pretty much out there and loving it, but the non-supporters are basically kind of sitting and we're all twiddling our thumbs.
There's an interesting comment here I want to bring up, and I want to second this. Ted says, Eric, you're like a shaman suffering for the rest of us so we can see more clearly what's in front of us. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, one, I want to thank you for doing this and taking on such a, I think I commented to you personally that I saw this as almost an athletic exercise that you've taken on, such an undertaking. The scale and the weight and the mass of these volumes adds to the my characterization of them as that athletic output. But your comments are probably much more important about mental health and the impact of these, you know, this sort of news obsession that you have waded into, both as a project, but certainly have been consumed by. Obviously, you were predisposed to be interested in this, like a lot of people. There was a very interesting program on WXXI. Evan Dawson had another WXXI news reporter on, someone who we hear from very often, and he was talking about the impact of news on his own, the kind of constant news cycle on his own mental health. So very interesting to think about the impact and the escalation of the news cycle that we experience today, and that it's inescapable with phones in our pocket and many high-powered media outlets and news stories that seem to change by the moment. The impact on someone like yourself and people who work in the media is huge. Do you have any thoughts on the long-term implications for all of our, just the casual consumer of news media out there? What are the implications on our mental health? Are people like you taking on a project like this, or media professionals sort of canaries in the coal mine?
I honestly think, I mean, all this information that's being thrown at everybody is why we are so far apart in the United States right now. The overloading of media, and we can all label it, oh, you know, there's certain people that only watch Fox News and, you know, others that will look at more media sources. It doesn't matter. We're being thrown so much information now, and that's what's really not helping our country at all, especially towards this election and the polarity, because any message can get out there now. And I don't just blame, it's not really the news outlets, but social media. The fact that we can disseminate so much information that's not even correct and not even fact-checked. I mean, if you think about newspapers, ever since the beginning of newspapers, there were some that were Republican-based newspapers and Democratic newspapers. I mean, this is nothing new. Benjamin Franklin ran fake news to try to harm the Native Americans back in the day. So again, we think that Trump and the idea of fake news is new. Nope, this has been going on. But mentally, how much we're seeing is what's killing our basically our minds in some ways. And I take that back to, I can talk about this, but my in-laws, my brother-in-laws and my father-in-law only watches Fox News. He's a true diehard Republican. And with that in mind, he'll watch Syracuse basketball also every once in a while. But I made a mistake. I actually left volume 1 and 2 out in the library, my photo library at home. And when he was over for Christmas Eve, and he goes, "What's this?" I'm like, "Oh no, I'm in trouble." And he opens up and he goes, "This is really good." I'm like, "What's good about it?" And he goes, "You can see the comparison of the different news channels and you can see the events." I'm like, "Okay, if it just worked on an 82-year-old off the boat Italian Republican. This is going to work for anybody. And we don't talk politics when we get together with my in-laws. And he goes, tomorrow, bring these to Christmas. And I'm like, Sandra, what do you think? That's my wife. And she goes, I don't know. My father wants you to bring them, bring them. So I take volume 1 and 2 and I pull them out and everybody starts looking at it. First, my brother-in-laws did the funny, oh, look, Fox News is right. Everybody else is wrong. And my sister-in-law chimed in and said, I don't think so. And I looked at him and said, you're Democratic? Like, yeah. I'm like, how did I not know this for the last 16 years? Because that's how much we don't talk about it. And a conversation ensued, which was about the events. And I think that's the one thing that, because we go to one side now with the information that we're provided, very few Americans will look at all of the news sources. And we really need to do that to understand what the other side is seeing. And that's the other part. I mean, it pertains to what's going on right now with Black Lives Matter and all these others. You have to understand what they are going through. Just like Republicans need to understand what Democrats are going through, and same thing on the other side. We don't have to agree, but we should at least be aware of one another.
So I want to ask you before I have a few more thoughts here, a few more questions. But before I forget, are there any other days that, as you've gone through this project and made such a major commitment to this effort, are there any other days, specific days that stand out for you that you want to highlight or talk about? Some that presented a unique contrast or a unique event?
Really, I would say what was interesting is the impeachment. Everybody had to cover it the same way because when he was impeached, but leading up to that, just the polarity between Fox and some of the others. Washington Post was truly some days in the middle between them. But I really say the entire time throughout the impeachment was really interesting to watch what was being covered. And there was a lot of different topics. That was the one time where the topics were almost different for each of the news channels. But before that, it was really Mueller report release was pretty important to see how that was being covered and the contrast between the different news stations, Notre Dame. But honestly, ever since COVID and the elections, just watching it every day, there's very few days where it's not interesting to see how the different media outlets and what they're demonstrating for people and how they're trying to get information out there. And sometimes you can see certain, like CNN or New York Times, will soften the information to try to get it out to both sides if they're willing to listen. And that's, I hate to generalize, there's just so much in my head of all this that it becomes very hard to pick a day. I could think about more of what we would call it, major events and what happened during those between them.
Yeah, and some of those events, obviously, they unfold in headlines over multiple days. Yeah. You know, do you think of this project as moving from new media to old media, with news headlines being super available, hyper ephemeral, changing more and more rapidly as we go as we talked about our sort of increased news cycle speed, but you're capturing these in one snap and something that's usually on a screen for a few hours or up to a day, and then you're locking it into print, and then you're printing it and you're binding it in a big heavy volume, and then that volume sits on a shelf as part of a edition, eight volume set, bigger than a whole set of encyclopedias. What are your thoughts on what you're doing? What are your comments on the kind of vacillation that you're doing between new media, old media, and then back to new media?
So really what I'm doing with this is with the books. My goal now at this point is to get it into university archives and special collections. And that could be people buying them to donate them. For me, I want to get them out pretty much at cost, because this is something that needs to live on for future generations. and the reason why it needs to be in print here. And I want to also then have the base files available so people can see these were not altered and they truly are an archive. So there will be the digital side as well. But I'm really hoping that future generations then, when they're researching the Trump presidency and how the idea of fake news was truly used as propaganda, how they can actually then study that. But rather than going through and just scrolling, and the reason is they have to stop, they'll have to slow down, they'll have to turn a page. It's so easy for us to now look for information as we flick through the iPhones. But the problem is there's a cost associated with that. So not everybody will have access. So my other mission for this project is I have what's called, the domain is fakenewsarchiveproject.com. And my intention is to have that live on, and it's free access. It will have every page up there. So anybody, if they're in the inner city of Rochester, if they're in Buffalo, if they're in the Midwest, you can go to this website if you're not near a university or a location that has one of these or the set in there, that they can then study it by viewing the pages. Problem is, if we get back to that whole idea of being able to scroll or pick and choose, right now I only have volume 1 and 2 up there. But an important part to me is also making sure everybody has access to this later on. And that's one of the things that I plan on doing with this is, even still with COVID happening, I was hoping we could do that event where we get together and give the pages, allow people to rebroadcast up on social media. And if it's not there now, it will be soon on the fakenewsarchiveproject.com. I will have the time lapse of how it happened at A. Smith Gallery. I gave a little quick discussion, and then I just sat back and watched everybody else take the pages that they thought were important and put up on the wall. Sometimes they use Sharpie. I want to create that type of an event on social media from October 14th, 21st. So if any of you watching want to help, please get in contact with me. I only have so much bandwidth right now to do this, and sometimes motivation, because it's hard staying motivated to even do the captures at this point. But the idea where people can take pages that are important to them, because the full PDFs will be available for online viewing, you can pull them down and then rebroadcast those particular pages. So I see it being used in multiple facets where there will be the archive. I truly hope to get into universities and special collections for different libraries, and then online for the full accessibility for everyone. So long answer to that question.
Eric, what's it like to be an artist today, dealing with potentially polarizing subject matter like this? Seemingly everything can be politicized, but this is right in the middle of political subject matter. What's it like to be an artist who's dealing with political content today?
So for me, even though I'm a photographer and I consider myself an artist and a book artist, I truly see this as being a documentary archive. So I don't see it as much being as much art as it is the documentary creating the archive. And so, but it also does really mesh with a lot of my other work, because my Payphone series is just as much a social documentary on about what's happening with race and economics here in Rochester. And then it will expand beyond Rochester to other locations. So I'd say, honestly, as an artist, I don't really consider this art. I honestly, at this point, consider this an addiction in some ways, and just something that I feel that I need to do. It sounds kind of odd for me to say, and that's the other reason why, if it was my art, I wouldn't feel that I want to have a website where people could take it for free. For me, even though I've gathered all this information, it doesn't belong to me. So I think that's one thing it's important for me to distinguish, is that I don't really see this as art for myself as much as something for future generations. And I truly say it, and it's because my future generation, my son, and then my daughter, is really the antithesis for why I started this project.
So here's I want to credit Stephen Parisi Gentili for this question. Has your engagement, such in-depth protracted engagement with sort of, use the parlance of your conversation here, and the parlance of our time, both sides through these media screenshots. Has it changed your political ideologies or your political beliefs?
Um, I'm still, honestly, what I would say about myself is I tend to be literally in the middle, maybe left leaning, but I can go both ways depending on the issue. And for overall, some of this, what I would say I've learned is where sometimes when we're so far left and right, nothing in the middle is getting done. I would still say I'm still the same political person. I will say this, there's actually with RIT, I guess I should say who I will not be voting for this year. But I've learned a lot from these particular pages. And that's the one thing is I wouldn't say it's changed me at all, but what has happened was I was very hopeful at the beginning as to what might actually occur. I did not expect what we're seeing to happen. And that's really the driving force behind this. I know I'm not really answering the question, but that's.
Do you feel you're in a better position now after all of this engagement with perhaps a wider array of political media content than the average person? Do you feel like you're in a better position now to talk to someone who isn't left-leaning like you are, to talk to someone who has different political ideas, and be conversant with them and understand them a little better now?
So absolutely. And the reason is, and it's not really, I can't do that for the far, far right who have their complete mindset made up, or the far, far left. It's both those where I have a hard time. But anybody that's willing to listen and actually have a discussion, which means you're in the middle. That's what I would say I am. I'm willing to have a discussion. I'm not, this is my stance and that's it. And with those people, I can have a conversation because I can say, oh, well, this happened, and I can give a linear timeline because of remembering most of what's happened with this news. I can't give dates, but it's okay. Well, no, that's not what happened. This is what happened first. And some people are like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, here it is if you want to find it. So yeah, no, the conversation, it's really allowed me to have conversations with people. And I've had, like I said, my in-laws, we've never talked about politics. We don't do it on purpose. I was able to have a conversation with them because of the books and the actual physical archives. So right there's the proof of what these pages can actually do. So.
And you've thus far kind of presented yourself as a neutral collector. I know you've tried to sort of systematize this, but have you really delved into your own bias and how that may have informed your positioning on the screenshots or the order or the time of day or any other bias? I want to, Brenna Farrell just asked a question that kind of touches on this. And this was a design consideration question that I had as well. Have you thought about your own bias and what you went into this with and how that informed the output?
I think my own personal bias is I was overcorrecting in some ways, and that's why I made sure I did CNN, ABC, Fox, New York Times, and Washington Post. And I think I overcorrected, and that's why I put Fox News in the middle, because I didn't want to have anybody look at it first and say, oh, left-leaning, right-leaning. I didn't want that to be the conversation of the pages. So that, I think those two is my background on my beliefs, and the fact that I didn't want to basically try to say, oh, who's supposed to be the most neutral between the different pages. And I think that's where that came into play. But what I've tried to do was make sure, and that's why when I first started out seeing it, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not giving that full perspective. And that really shows where I was recording only CNN at first. So right there shows a bias of who I typically go to most. And so that's why I changed and said, okay, I need multiple news outlets. So I'm not just showing my side of it. And then from there, that's when, recording all the different stations. And that's why I only take a photograph if it's changed. So if CNN's more rapidly changed, Fox News, if they haven't changed, that's the only reason why they're left behind, where you might see 5 CNNs in a row. So it's really about what's appearing on the phones.
Understood. So, we're getting on. It's about 8 o'clock. Do you have any thoughts about the overall exhibition and, positioning this project? I'm not asking for, negative or positive feedback on my curation. Well, I guess what I'm asking for is, how you feel. You've been pretty clear that this isn't your artwork, your arty artwork. You've set yourself up as a producer of this. Arguably as an exercise. And do you have any thoughts on how this fits in with other, political art conversations, or perhaps the other artworks in the show?
I think that's where I thought it was perfect that you had past, present, and future in the exhibition. What was great about, the work, which is right behind you on the right-hand side for people that are seeing Bleu, that's, about the idea of history. And the idea, what was great was the books are there, and some of the history, people don't know whether it's real or not on that date. They could literally walk across the gallery and cross-reference for events that happened from 2016 up until now that might be on the wall. It's like, wait a minute, is this day the day that Notre Dame Cathedral burned? But there's a lot of fun play with that. And then the video, as you're looking at these books, you're hearing what's going on behind you with what the future is. And right now we're seeing it in this election, the fake videography, the deep fake technology that's occurring. And some is rudimentary, where they're, pausing Joe Biden looking down. It looks like he's falling asleep. And then the interview is cut for an interview that was with Hillary Clinton years ago. So we're seeing that today. And then also in the show was, ironically, Andrew's paintings, the Subway series, where that was all about basically people with their cell phones, which this entire series was rooted on my cell phone. So the curation of what's going on there, but there's also other people, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on a name all of a sudden. Jen would kill me from, I'll get back to it, but there's a lot of other artists that are actually out there doing things different ways, talking about fake news. And some people are just doing it to basically make themselves feel better about what's happening. And even some of them have put it down. Jan Nagel is the artist I was just thinking about, who's basically taking photographs that's the world upside down and taking the fake news of the day and putting that in quotes. So that's what future generations are gonna see. Sometimes what I would say, which that is true art, where she's having a reaction to it, where I'm just recording the history. So that's where I think there's gonna be so much look back on of what people have created at this time in the future. And that's where I just hope that this archive lives on.
Great. Is there anything that you, any encouragement you can give to younger artists who are wading into commenting on and recording and documenting, reflecting on this time that we're in, or other artists maybe your age?
What I would say is don't expect instant gratification. And the reason why I say that is you see the news here, you see what's happening on the phones. For me, there was no real project intended that was going to become a book, but instead it just basically snowballed. Allow your reaction sometimes to be the antithesis to why you're creating your work. Don't look at the current fads that's occurring. This is not a fad by any means, meaning that I don't know anybody else that's been recording either payphones or now the fake news. But the idea is that, why are you creating it? And I already told you what my reason was. I wanted an archive for my kids. And then it just snowballed and became much, much larger. And allow yourself to change. Just because you had the idea for when you start a project, allow the change, learn from the projects. That's one of the best parts. I thank a lot of you that I've met at different portfolio reviews, that we've met in person or even online, for coming tonight. But it's from discussions with other people where my work has grown. Even this idea of the fake news book, the rebroadcast event, I'm always trying to get help and support from other people. So
will you be hesitant to take on a new project that could possibly become this large and all-consuming?
if it deals with my iPhone, maybe. But yeah, I never thought after the 9/11 project I would do something so similar. And I really see a lot of similarity between what we did with the newspapers and now how I'm capturing the news here. And so I'm really hoping that I don't ever need to do this again, because I'm hoping there's not something as major to what's happening now or 9/11. So that's how I'm hoping.
Is there anything else about the project that you'd like to share?
I guess the one thing is, if anybody watching is truly interested in trying to help through social media channels to get the word out, where people are gonna be able to take down the files, the PDFs, and I can give instructions how they open it up when they find a page that they want. They can open Photoshop, save it as a JPEG, and put that on their social media channels. I would just love to try to take over social media channels from October 14th to 21st, right before the election, to put all these events back in front of people. And again, whether you're left or right, that people are saying never occurred. Well, here they are in print. And then they can go back and fact check that possibly. And that's why it's so important to have these on the iPhone to say, hey, this actually did happen. So
I'd like to see these archived in perhaps in local libraries here. That would be really interesting.
that's one of the biggest goals. Before COVID hit, Baylor University was interested in adding them to their book arts collection. And that's the other thing that I'm hoping maybe even some people will want to buy and donate it to different universities that they know for the future. But this is also changing. One thing that I realized, it's fun to have 1,000 pages in Roku, but those books, volumes 3, 4, and 5 are literally going to need to be split in half to be put into an archive, because number one, the stress of the binding, and B, if somebody drops it, they'll literally break their foot. The books are about 62 pounds, I believe, volumes 4 and 5. Would you say that's about right, Rocco? Or Blue, you were lifting them up.
Yeah, they're heavy.
So the practicality to it also, and that's where it's constantly changing. It's probably going to be 8 volumes, but depending on what happens, it could go upwards of 10 now. I did forget to mention that volumes 4 and 5, for those 1,000 pages, I apologize that I forgot to mention this earlier. Volume 4 is literally just March and April of 2020. And I believe it's 963 pages. Volume 5 is May and June, and that is 1,082 pages, because of how much news is being thrown out there daily and changing. The one bias is there might be news that's not captured, because if I'm doing something with my family, or if I'm teaching at RIT, I can't do that every hour. So that would also be, back to your bias question, is sometimes it's just my life is also going to affect the archive.
Well, we're all going to check in on you in the coming months and make sure you're okay, and definitely take a break after the election. A lot of us are going to need it, but you're going to need it more. I think, Eric, it's a terrific project. It's really wonderful to have it here on display through November as part of this exhibition. Thank you for going through this and producing this and staying the course through this really complicated and all-consuming project. It's really an incredible thing to witness and experience. And I want to encourage everyone to come down and see the exhibition. Everyone is given gloves when they come into the gallery. Of course, masks are required. But every person entering is given gloves to really encourage you to feel safe in handling the book and the different volumes, so that you can take some time and look through those and experience what Eric has created here. And please, everyone else who's listening, join us this Saturday at noon for a similar talk with Bill Posters and Daniel Howe, who created the deep fake videos. They're really the leading deep fake artists in the world who are using this technology, this AI video editing technology. It's really the cutting edge of misinformation, frankly. As Eric said, we see it already in this election, and we're going to see more and more of it. And then on October 10th, join us again for a talk with Octavio Abundez and his major project, which you see behind me there, A Fake History of Humanity. Thank you everyone for joining us. And Eric, again, thank you so much for all of your efforts and really delving deep into this incredible media moment and capturing it as in as neutral a way as humanly possible.
Thank you. And also, if you need to get in contact with me, because fakenewsarchiveproject.com, I forgot to mention, there's only a contact form page because of a lot of spam mail that was occurring. Those of you that are on here, if you want to get through and email me, you can find my real email address on my website, which is just erickunsman.com. That way, if you need to, you can contact me if you are interested in possibly helping from October 14th to 21st. Thank you, Alyssa, for putting my website up on the chat.
Excellent. Yes. And thank you, Alyssa and Jess, for facilitating today. Terrific photos and great orchestration of this discussion. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.